Welcome back to Philosophy and Ethics in Games, where we use games as thought experiments to discuss topics like situational ethics, moral decision-making, and how we can improve our lives and the world we live in. I'm Josh Bearheart Hawk, and today we're diving headfirst into the Animus to discover what it was like to be a pirate in the 18th century through Assassin's Creed Black Flag. Not only is Assassin's Creed Black Flag a new game in the Philosophy and Ethics series, but I'm also changing up a few things. Those who have been following the series for a while know that typically we spend each episode diving into the story of a game in chronological order. This has been a double-edged sword, as it's allowed me to really dig deep into the stories, but it's also caused some confusion for those who find this channel for the first time and expect a normal game breakdown with attention to lore like you might find anywhere else. But Philosophy and Ethics in Games is about connecting games to the real world, using them as thought experiments to talk about history, morality, and ethical situations. So instead of breaking down the story bit by bit, we're going to be dividing the game into subjects and looking at it from that angle. This week, we'll be discussing privateering and its role in creating a golden age for piracy. Next week, we'll be looking closer at Edward Kenway and his decision to leave behind the love of his life to pursue fortune at sea. Finally, we'll be rounding out the discussion of the game by talking about Abstergo Entertainment and their amazing technology that allows DNA to be used to relive the lives of people's ancestors. What would it be like if we had that kind of tech, and what would be the best way to use it? In the end, my goal with Philosophy and Ethics in Games moving forward is to structure each game as a lecture series to talk about themes and moral lines that the stories bring up. As always, I'll link any sources I use in these lectures in the description for those who want to learn more, and you'll see a citation in the upper right-hand corner of the video tying the link to the moment in the discussion. So with that out of the way, let's trim those sails and raise the colors in Assassin's Creed Black Flag. Edward Kenway found himself on a ship in the middle of the Caribbean in June of 1715, with a storm and battle raging all around. Only months before, he'd made the decision to become part of a crew on a privateering vessel, with dreams of riches and freedom leading the way. But what is privateering, and how does the idea tie into the real world? Going back as far as the 12th century, governments in various places around the world began issuing what were known as letters of marque to privately owned ships. These documents allowed the ships to act as almost an extension of the government in times of war, allowing them to attack and take merchant vessels sailing under the flag of the enemy in those times of war. The privateers, as they were called, were allowed to keep the majority of the spoils gained in these attacks, usually paying only a small fee to the government upon the sale of whatever goods they plundered. But the sale of those goods wasn't always a straightforward and easy task. The privateer would first have to capture the enemy merchant ship, firing on it and potentially engaging in a battle. Then, assuming they won, they would need to install a crew and a temporary captain, known as a prize master, to sail the ship into port, where they would then need to wait for court proceedings to finish up before selling the goods they had taken at auction. Now, this sounds incredibly convoluted, and the first question most people might ask is, why in the world would anyone want to be a privateer, and why would any government want to use them? To that first question, Edward himself provides at least part of the answer in an early flashback where his wife is asking him why he would prefer to be a privateer over joining the King's Navy.
Wouldn't pay so nice if it weren't.
Why not sail with the King's Navy? Earn a proper wage, sail under gentlemen.
Sod the Navy's gentlemen. For every shilling I'd earn, the captain gets 600. That's no way to earn a fortune.
We don't need a fortune.
It's not about need, Caroline. I want food that don't make me sick. I want walls that hold back the wind. I want a decent life.
Privateering was more profitable than joining up with the official navy, but that wasn't the only reason it was seen as preferable. Terms with the Navy could last 1 or more years, and you were almost guaranteed to see some kind of combat, whereas a stint on a privateering ship could last only a few short months and be spent mostly taking down lightly armed merchant ships. On top of that, privateers were officially sanctioned by the government, meaning you didn't need to worry about winding up in jail, and even if you were captured by an enemy ship, you would be treated as a prisoner of war rather than an actual criminal, thanks to international laws and the recognition of privateering as a legitimate enterprise. For the government side of things, privateering was cheaper and easier than building and maintaining an entire navy. Taxes that were used to pay for such endeavors were a lot more difficult to levy and collect prior to the mid-19th century, and a navy had to be kept up both in war and in peacetime, whereas a privateering letter of marque was only used and needed in wartime. The other big incentive for governments was to deter the act of piracy by legitimizing ships under the flag of the government. The more ships that you can turn into privateers to protect and fill your waters, the fewer people you need to worry about attacking your merchants, because privateers were only authorized to attack the merchant ships from enemy nations. But privateering was only meant for wartime, so would Edward Kenway even be able to join a crew in 1715? Officially, the British and Spanish had been fighting prior to 1715 in the War of Spanish Succession, with the Treaty of Utrecht formally ending hostilities between the nations. The war continued in a way, however, in the Caribbean Sea as skirmishes broke out both on land and on the water between forces from both countries. While privateers had been employed by both the British and the Spanish prior to 1715 as part of the war, by the time we first see Edward Kenway in June of 1715, any letter of marque that he had been working under would have ended. But he wasn't the only one finding himself suddenly unemployed by the end of the war, as thousands of men who had previously worked as privateers or as part of the navies for both countries suddenly found themselves struggling to make a living wage. This influx of newly unemployed sailors led to a jump in piracy, with many of them turning to the illegal activity because of a lack of other options. In 1715, a Spanish galleon called Urca de Lima sunk near Florida, bringing a recovery effort from the Spanish and a fleet of pirates intent on taking the plunder for themselves. Many of these pirates would become infamous in the intervening years, with names like Henry Jennings, Charles Vane, Samuel Bellamy, Benjamin Hornigold, and Edward England being just a few that would show up and usher in what would be one of the last golden ages for pirates in the Atlantic region. But it was around this time that something known as the triangular trade would crop up, a trade route focused on taking people from Africa to sell as slaves to plantations in the Caribbean, with the slavers taking goods like tobacco, sugar, and cocoa back to England before starting the route all over. This was just one of the lucrative trade setups that included the Caribbean, making the region a prime area to set up if you wanted to be a pirate and make any kind of money. But there weren't a lot of places that would accept pirates or their stolen goods in the region, with many of the major ports like Kingston, Port Royal, and Jamaica being closed to anyone partaking in piracy. But just as we see in the game, there was one place that they could go: Nassau. Nassau would become a home base for many of the pirates in the Caribbean, including the likes of Hornigold, Jennings, and Blackbeard. They would sail out of the port until around 1718, when the King's Act of Grace would allow pardons to be granted by Governor Woodes Rogers, bringing Nassau back under control of the Crown. Many pirates would accept these pardons, including Blackbeard and Hornigold, though Blackbeard would eventually return to piracy, even as Hornigold went back to privateering. The pardons and loss of Nassau wasn't the end of piracy in the Caribbean, however, and the number of men willing to become pirates would continue to grow over the years as conditions on the merchant vessels got worse. Sailors would often find themselves in poor working conditions, with little food and low wages. Those who didn't die of starvation would often succumb to other ailments, and when the opportunity to better their lives arose in the form of becoming pirates, the decision wouldn't really be that hard to make. In the game, after taking a ship in battle, Edward and his crew offered the remaining members of the captured ship the chance to join them or die. Most of them choose to join the pirate crew, and it isn't really hard to imagine this kind of scenario playing out in real life, given how much better the conditions on the pirate ship might have been. A couple of closing notes on pirates and the historical accuracy of the game are warranted here, because at its core, Assassin's Creed Black Flag is based on some very real historical moments and figures. We see the loss of Nassau play out, and we get the chance to fight with and alongside the likes of Blackbeard and Hornigold, among others. But there are also a couple of names I haven't mentioned yet that find themselves crossing paths with Edward in his adventures. Anne Bonny and Mary Read were among the most famous female pirates of the era. They joined up with John Rackham and sailed through the Caribbean for a short time before being captured on October 22, 1720, and sentenced to death for piracy. Those sentences in real life, just like the game, would be postponed, however, as they both claimed to be pregnant. And, just like we see in the game, Mary Read would wind up dying in prison months later. But Anne would disappear with no real record of what happened to her. Now, there's a lot of speculation around her fate, with rumors ranging from her dying at some point in prison, to her family somehow being involved in having her released and sent to the American colonies, to even her dying in 1933 in Jamaica. In the game, of course, Anne Bonny goes on to serve as the quartermaster on the Jackdaw alongside Kenway as he leads the ship into the final segments of the game and beyond. But as Kenway was entirely fictional, this isn't really anything more than a fantasy. At the end of the day, we tend to romanticize pirates and the life they led, with many books, movies, and games focusing on the idea of sailing the open sea with no master to answer to, and nothing to worry about save where your next bottle of rum will be coming from. But the life of a pirate was often a short one, with the threat of being killed or captured hanging on every sunrise. And while the idea of being completely free to go where the wind blows you is a fun one, every man has chains that bind him in one way or another. For pirates, those chains were laws set forth by governments that wanted to instill some kind of order to the world. For privateers, the letter of marque held them to a standard and kept them in line, even as the pay gave them some hope for a better future. For Edward Kenway, he would find out that the bindings that seemed to be holding him back in his married life were only one version of the world, and his dreams of salt in the air and gold in his pocket weren't much more than an illusion, carefully crafted to entice him into a life that he couldn't escape. But that breakdown is for next week, as we'll be looking for the reasons that he stepped into a life of piracy, the cost involved, and the consequences that he has to live with. To make sure you don't miss out on that and future videos, hit the like button on this video and subscribe to Lost in Games on YouTube. I release new philosophy and ethics in games videos every Thursday, as well as unscripted videos each week, where I break down and discuss morality and ethics in games, movies, and TV shows in a more laid-back format. For those who want to go above and beyond to help me continue making videos like this, I've got channel memberships and a Patreon. For just a couple bucks a month, you can help me keep breaking down games like Black Flag while getting your name on the screen and early access to videos and more. That's all I've got for now. I want to thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.